I'm Teresa.
And I'm Callista, and this is Terrifyingly Typical True Crime.
We're a true crime podcast that covers series of common crimes or typical themes in true crime by diving into a related case each week. Rather than covering a different one-off case every week, we connect several cases to explore that type of crime or criminal. If you're like us and drawn to true crime because you're curious about the extremes of human behavior and want to understand how someone could commit such atrocious acts, we hope that delving into related cases puts them into perspective. We're continuing with our theme of Daughters Who Kill. We will be covering two cases in this episode as they are both a little shorter. On to the cases.
We are horrified and shocked by this matter. She has been placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of the criminal process. The school, the Office of Catholic Education, and the Archdiocese are cooperating with law enforcement in the course of its work. This is a statement from the Archdiocese of Philadelphia on January 20th, 2023, regarding Verity A. Beck, a former teacher at St. Catherine's School of Special Education in Wynwood. Wynwood is a suburban community west of Philadelphia, and the Archdiocese is the educational and spiritual leader of the Office of Catholic Education. In the aftermath of her crimes, church officials said Verity passed a criminal background check and there were no complaints during her brief employment. So, what were these crimes?
Verity Beck, a 45-year-old former special education teacher, has been convicted of killing her parents. Reid, a retired director of training with Union Local 420, and Miriam, a retired school nurse, with whom she lived within or around January 7th, 2023. That's the last day their son, Justin, had spoken with Miriam, and the first date in the newspapers that had been piling up outside their home. Verity had been using her deceased parents' cell phones to communicate with the cleaning lady, making fictitious dinner plans with a friend, and even posed as her parents to text their grandchildren and her brother Justin. These texts were what prompted her brother to visit the home on January 17th, as he found it odd that he hadn't spoken with either of his parents, and the tone of the text just didn't seem right.
When Verity was confronted by her brother, she admitted that things had quote unquote been bad, which was quite an understatement as he noticed a body covered with a sheet and a bloody chainsaw next to it. This body was later confirmed to be that of his father. He spent some time trying to persuade his sister to call the police, but she said she needed more time. Justin left knowing that his sister had at least one gun. He returned to his home and called 911.
I just want to say big kudos to Justin. I can't even imagine the hell and fear coursing through him. He sees what looks to be a body, a bloody chainsaw, listens to his sister's confession, and has the wherewithal to leave this house of horrors. Wasn't he afraid that she could possibly turn on him and kill him too?
I would have been terrified. I'm not sure I would have made it out of that situation alive.
Yeah, that seems like the normal reaction. Officers arrived a little while later to their brick-fronted home in the 100 block of Beverly Road in the Jenkinstown section of Abington, a suburb of Philadelphia, and a small enclave of middle-class homes with a little over 4,500 residents. Officers attempted to verify if Verity was in the home, as the house was oddly quiet. After knocking numerous times with no answer, they entered the home a little after midnight on January 18th. They were immediately hit with the smell of decomposition. As I mentioned, they believe she killed her parents on January 7th, and the officers were entering the house in the early morning hours of January 18th. There were cleaning bottles and lit candles scattered throughout the house,
Which were clearly failing to mask the smell.
I mean, it's reminiscent of our first case, Virginia McCullough, where no one could smell the decomp. Though after 4 years, that makes more sense.
Mm-hmm.
Officers announced themselves, and Verity met them in the kitchen. Officers asked where her parents were, and she stated that they were dead. Just like Virginia, I'm a little surprised by the immediate confession, though maybe she was just, I don't know, stating the obvious.
I do think with both of them at that point, they knew the jig was up. The officers were in for a grisly scene. Inside the well-maintained home, they found the partially dismembered bodies of Reid, 73, and Miriam, 72. Each victim had been shot in the head once. Differing reports indicate that her father had been almost decapitated. Reed's body was found in a bedroom, and parts of Miriam's body were found in a trash can in the garage. Police also found a safe with drill marks in the house and assumed that Verity, unable to locate the key or combination, had been desperate to get into the safe by any means necessary. As you will have guessed, based on her eagerness to get her hands on the contents of the safe, just like with our first case on Virginia McCulloch, financial ruin seems to be the reason for the murders. Verity was facing a myriad of money issues, had a recent bankruptcy, and her father, Reid, had confronted her about stealing money from them. It was revealed that Reid and Miriam had accused Verity of stealing a $600 rent check from a coastal property in nearby Sea Isle City, New Jersey, that they owned, and most tellingly, 5 days before the murders, Reid had confronted Verity about Amazon purchases using his bank account, including a necklace exceeding $1,000. Reid told his daughter that he had reported the purchases as fraudulent, and good on him. But Verity's financial woes were not a new problem. She wanted their money, was caught taking their money numerous times, then killed them for it.
Verity had a spending addiction, had stolen money from her parents on numerous occasions, and they confronted her and told her that this had to stop. She feels like all her options are gone. She could lose her job. Her parents could make her leave the family home. She is in debt. She had this addiction. She needs their money, and they are in the way. Killing them seems like the only option. I'm always a little surprised at how cases like this escalate. However, when you feel that you have exhausted any other option, I guess it is not that big of a leap. I think dismembering them is a special kind of twisted, but she did this with the hopes of hiding their bodies and believing that she wouldn't be caught. But before she could carry this plan out, Justin, being the concerned son, thwarted the plan. How many killers have you heard of that know they have bungled things, but are narcissistic enough to think that they are smarter than the authorities and will be able to get away with their crime?
It seems like a lot of them aren't able to realize that in most rooms, they are, in fact, not the smartest person.
I mean, too true. I can't imagine what was going through her head that she thought the only option was to kill them. How long did she think she was going to hold off her brother, who was used to talking to his parents every few days? I know she wasn't thinking. However, this wasn't a snap decision. She had called a local gun store and days before the murders went to the gun store and purchased two guns. Did she honestly think that it would be easy to dismember their bodies and haul the trash cans to some remote area and then tell everyone they have packed up and moved? And oh, by the way, they left their cell phones and I don't know where they went? Obviously, I mean, that was never going to work.
As you said, I think a lot of killers are such narcissists that they think they are charismatic and manipulative enough to get away with their outlandish lies and are shocked when they don't.
True. Her defense attorney, James Lyons, said that everyone in her family knew that Verity had mental health issues, but they didn't recognize how serious they had become. I realize that this is his job, but I question how you can be sane at the time of the murder but still plead guilty but mentally ill. I hear you shouting. Someone would have to be mentally ill to take a chainsaw to anyone, especially your parents. But I think that is an easy way for people to categorize people that commit horrific crimes as mentally ill. I don't think this is true. I think it is easier for quote unquote normal people in society to label someone like Verity, who committed this atrocious crime, as mentally ill rather than question societal norms and the many factors that lead someone to do something like this. People commit heinous crimes every day. However, I would argue that shooting someone is on a different level than shooting them realizing you have two dead bodies, the bodies of your parents, in the house where you all live, and then going to the next step of, well, shit, what do I do now? Rational thought is absent, and dismembering the bodies with a chainsaw apparently seems like a viable option.
Yeah, it's true that some killers are legally insane, but most of them aren't. It's human nature to want to make ourselves feel better by saying it's unlikely anyone we know could ever do something like this. However, the reality is that when push comes to shove, most people are capable of violence given the right circumstances. You just have to look at any history textbook to see that. But I did want to add that maybe her lawyer thought he could argue she had a brief psychotic disorder where she was ill at the time of the murders but has recovered now.
He certainly could, but I think purchasing 2 guns before the murder kind of negates that. Though this is America and guns, all kinds of guns, are readily available, so maybe
Too
not.
true.
Mr. Lyon sought to bar prosecutors from using as evidence text conversations between Verity and her parents regarding her troubling financial situation. I don't know what your thoughts are, and I'm not dissing the defense attorney. A good one will do all they can to defend their client, obviously. However, I always find it interesting, scratch that, I find it really troubling that something like this, which it looks like from various sources was the reason why Verity felt she had no options and killed her parents, is completely relevant. It is like when a person is on trial for rape and murder, and the defense attorney, depending on all kinds of specifics, obviously, is able to bar evidence of a prior rape arrest. Really, it always astonishes me. However, Mr. Lyons was unsuccessful and text messages were allowed.
I really struggle with prejudicial evidence. I'll preface this by saying I've never studied the law, but it really is wild that evidence that shows form, like someone on trial for murder who has previously committed murder, can be excluded. So I'm glad the texts were admissible.
Yeah, I completely agree with that sentiment.
Verity was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole on September 30th, 2024, after entering a plea of guilty but mentally ill on 2 counts of first degree murder. Verity chose not to engage or comment to reporters stationed outside the courthouse. However, inside the courthouse, she did admit to shooting her parents and dismembering their bodies. Prosecutors did not seek the death penalty in this case. In January 2024, Verity had indicated that she planned to use the insanity defense. She had several mental health evaluations and was determined competent to stand trial. The court found that she was sane at the time of the murders, but did accept her plea of guilty but mentally ill.
So I went down a bit of a rabbit hole here. I had obviously heard of guilty by reason of insanity, but not guilty but mentally ill. I was curious if all states have this same law, and of course they don't. That would be too easy.
Hmm.
First, I found it really surprising that 4 states do not even have an insanity defense. Any guesses which states those are?
I don't think so.
Yeah, I was a bit shocked to realize that 3 are in the West: Montana, Idaho, and Utah. I mean, maybe not so surprising with Idaho, but anyhow,
Mhm.
with Kansas being the only Midwestern state. No judgment here, but I was a little surprised that no Southern states were on this list because several Southern states do have the death penalty, and Texas and Oklahoma hold the record for the most executions. In my mind, a state with a lot of executions would have harsher laws in place regarding insanity and mentally ill pleas. Seems like this information is always changing, but currently, Pennsylvania, South Carolina, South Dakota, and Nevada allow this specific defense of guilty but mentally ill, while Alaska, Georgia, and Utah allow some variations of this plea.
Yeah, that's weird. I wouldn't have guessed that either.
Yeah. Anyway, during her lifetime incarceration, Verity will receive medical care, but because this is not an insanity plea, she will serve her sentence in a therapeutic wing of the prison instead of the maximum security section and not an institution. What do you think of this sentence? I know you have a lot of feelings about our prison system and how we treat the mentally ill. Do you not think she was mentally ill? Do you think the sentence was just?
Without knowing pretty much anything, not even what her psych eval said, I won't attempt to make my completely unqualified assessment of her mental health. I would say, though, that given the violent nature of her crime, she needs to be in a secure facility, and we can only hope that the therapeutic wing is equipped to provide her with the care she needs to improve.
Well said. And I just have to say, therapeutic wing sounds like, I think it sounds maybe better than it actually is, but there's always hope.
Yeah, I feel like it's one of those things where it's something that's advertised as more than it is. Like when it's a gym that has one treadmill and maybe a dumbbell.
That's a good point.
Okay, on to the next case. In the early morning hours on April 15th, 2008, neighbors in Bawan Kheri, a village in the northern Indian state of Uttar Pradesh, heard screaming coming from a nearby home. Villagers rushed the well kept 2-story home situated in a mango orchard and were greeted by crying 22-year-old Shabnam Ali. After the villagers quickly noticed gruesome scene with a male body bloodied and laying on the floor, they left and called the police. Police arrived and asked Shabnam what had happened. She told the investigators that she had been asleep on the terrace because it was such a hot night and had woken up when it began to rain.
As an American, I cannot imagine sleeping on the deck, patio, or terrace. But with limited air conditioning, this is a popular way for Indians to get relief from the sweltering heat.
And as someone who does not do well in hot temperatures, fair enough.
Upon entering the home, police found, and again, I'm going to apologize for probably my butchering of the names, but I'll do my best.
We're doing our best.
Yeah. Police found her father, Shagat Ali, 55, on the ground floor, dead. They then ventured to the second level of the home and found the rest of the family. Hashmi, 50, elder brother Anis, 35, Anis' wife Anjum, 25, younger brother Rashid, 22, cousin Rabia, 14, and Arsh, Ani's 10-month-old son, who was laying between his parents. Investigators immediately doubted Shabnam's story. The iron front door had been locked, and there was no damage to the door, indicating a possible break in. The sheets that the family members were laying on were straight, no wrinkles, indicating that there was unlikely any struggle. This led the investigators to believe that the family members had been drugged and then their throats had been slashed, all except little Arsh, who looked like he had been strangled. Most damning, investigators found discarded bloody clothes haphazardly hidden under other clothes in Shabnam's bedroom. Perplexed with her story, police wondered how Shabnam did not wake up while seven members of her family were brutally murdered. Shabnam again stated that she was asleep on the terrace. She said that she thought hoodlums must have broken into her family's home and murdered everyone.
Those damn hoodlums.
I mean, exactly. Investigators weren't buying her flimsy tale. If a criminal had broken in, how would they have subdued the entire family? And how would the rest of the family not have woken up when they heard a supposed attack? Police theorized that the family had been drugged.
The post-mortem would prove the inspector's initial theory correct. All 7 members of the family had been drugged with the sedative diazepam except for 10-month-old Arsh. The post-mortem confirmed investigators' initial assumption that little Arsh had been strangled. Police also obtained Shabnam's phone records, which showed 52 calls to her 24-year-old lover, Sareem, on the night of the murders. 5 days after the crime, Shabnam and Sareem were arrested for the murders. Shabnam was a teacher at the village school with 2 advanced degrees in English and geography. She was raised in a stable home by parents who were not wealthy but comfortable and respected. Her father, Shaukat, for example, was an art teacher at a nearby college. So, what led her to commit familicide with the help of Sareem? Even though familicide is rarely committed by women, it isn't unheard of, but the courts would later refer to this case as the rarest of the rare.
Shabnam's family disapproved of her dating Sareem, who is only indicated by his first name in all the material we reviewed, who came from a different socioeconomic background. Shabnam's family was well educated and of a higher socioeconomic class than Sareem's family. In addition, Shabnam's family was, Saifi Muslim, while Sareem was a Pathan. While still Muslim, he did not meet with her father's approval. Additionally, he worked as a low-income day wager and had a fifth-grade education. Shaukat insisted that she end her relationship with Sareem. Shabnam was 7 weeks pregnant at the time of the murders. It is unclear from various sources if Shabnam knew she was pregnant at this time. One source indicated that Shabnam told her father that she was pregnant, but I have a hard time believing that based on the strict traditional patriarchal society she was living in, that she would have told him. This would have brought immense dishonor to the family. Other villagers would have not been able to accept this harem act. Harem means anything forbidden by Islamic law. If you are a plebe like me, Muslim refers to a person who practices the religion of Islam, while Islam is the name of the religion itself. I kind of always thought that those words were interchangeable.
I feel like I might have heard that before, but maybe I've just implanted that false memory. Although Indian castes are often associated with the Hindu community, similar social hierarchies exist among Muslim families based on their historical occupation or which part of the Arab world they come from. Families often pressure children to marry within their own communities. Failure to do so can lead to violence and, in extreme cases, honor killings, when family members are murdered for bringing alleged shame onto the family. The kind of shame Shabnam would bring by being pregnant with Serene's child.
Shabnam and Sareem refused to end their relationship and began to plan the murders. You may be asking yourself, why didn't she just leave? Or why couldn't she and Sareem leave their traditional village and live somewhere else? I think this is one of those instances where we should withhold judgment on a society that is so different from our own. If members of a couple are from different religions and socioeconomic backgrounds in the US and are in a very insular town or state, they may be able to move to a neighboring state or city where no one knows them. However, in a country as large as India, there were over 1.429 billion people as of 2023. It's hard to wrap my mind around that.
Yeah.
And for comparison, the US had 334.9 million people in 2023. India is so steeped in history, tradition, and values where different parts of the country speak different languages and dialects, and women are treated as second class citizens, even in the large cities. It is easy to see how she felt trapped with no option. I am in no way condoning what she did. She was intelligent and educated. Could she not have saved money from her job and left India? Certainly, that seems like a better option.
Obviously, we're not excusing what she did, but we don't want to ignore the context either, especially because society in which she lived will come back to play a role in her defense.
Definitely. I think a lot of times people have a hard time recognizing how different daily life is for people, especially women in a country like India.
Absolutely. Shabnam and Sareem had planned the murders, but only in the most simplistic of ways, without giving much thought to alibis, where to discard bloody clothes, how to get their stories straight, if the postmortem would find the sedatives. That is to say, they disregarded all the important aspects investigators would be sure to look at. That didn't stop them from going through with their problematic plan, though, because on the evening of April 14th, 2008, Shabnam offered to make tea for her family after dinner. While making the tea, she dissolved numerous tablets of sedatives, which Sareem had obtained for her, into their drinks. Sareem had attempted to purchase the sedative from a local pharmacy, but the strong sedative, diazepam, required a prescription. But luck was on Sareem's side at this point because there was a fruit vendor outside of the pharmacy who agreed to help Sareem procure the pills. I don't imagine the fruit vendor had a sign that indicated he moonlighted as someone who could obtain pills for the asking, but maybe he saw Sareem's frustrated demeanor when he couldn't get what he needed from the pharmacy and took it as an opportunity to make some money.
We can assume that's what happened.
Everyone drank the tea except for Shabnam's 10-month-old nephew, who was still breastfeeding. After everyone was asleep, or maybe passed out would be a better description, Shabnam called Sareem, who arrived at the house with an axe. While Shabnam held the head of each family member up, Sareem slit their throats, all except the baby. The baby started crying, and they were afraid his cries would be heard by the other villagers. Her 10-month-old nephew, whom she had lived with since his birth, needed to be silenced. So Shabnam strangled her nephew. After they had all been killed, Sareem left the house, got rid of the murder weapon on his way home, then quietly entered his family home and went to bed hoping to solidify his alibi that he had been home all night. Shabnam, for her part, went to her room to change out of her bloody clothes, carelessly putting them in an existing pile of clothes already on her floor. She then went out onto the terrace to yell for help from nearby neighbors.
Shabnam and Sareem were arrested and held at different jails. Unsurprisingly, being jailed resulted in them turning on each other.
As it usually does.
Of course, your self preservation skills are really going to kick in once you are in jail.
Mm-hmm.
Shabnam, Shabnam said Sareem came into her family's home while, again, she was sleeping on the terrace and murdered them by himself with the axe. Sareem said that it was Shabnam's idea to kill her family. Shabnam gave birth to her and Sareem's son while in jail. In India, it's interesting, a child born while the mother is in custody is allowed to stay with the mother until they are 7.
Hmm.
Shabnam's uncle, Sattar Ali, described her, and I assume he thought, flattering terms, as both demure and obedient, and that no one thought she was capable of murdering her family. The Sessions Court, or District Court of I'm going to say it wrong, Amoro? I'm sorry. In India, trials are overseen by a judge as trials were abolished in 1973, who, after hearing evidence and reviewing postmortem reports, awarded the death sentence to both Shabnam and Sareem in 2010. The decision was upheld by the Allahabad High Court in 2013 and also by the Supreme Court in 2015. Both Sareem and Shabnam tried valiantly to have their death sentence overturned. Shabnam pleaded mercy because she had a child, and a child needs its mother. The court was not moved by this argument and stated that the couple had heinously murdered 7 people, including a 10-month-old child, and crime like that does not spare any excuse.
I'm against the death penalty, but it is pretty rich to claim her child needed her, as if a child's welfare was her main concern after having strangled her 10-month-old nephew.
Exactly. It's not like the court doesn't have that information or know what you have done, and you now want to argue that being a mother precludes you from the death sentence?
Exactly. Both Shabnam and Sareem were sentenced to death by hanging. Shabnam has appealed her case numerous times, and even though it was heard by the Indian Supreme Court, she has not exhausted all her appeals options. The Supreme Court really leaned into the patriarchal roots India is known for and made a point of indicating that the death sentence should be upheld because this was again a rarest of rare case subject they did not broach the subject of reform, nor did they acknowledge that executing both Shabnam and Sareem would leave their son an orphan. They did, however, indicate, based on her educational level, that she should have known better.
I mean, I certainly agree with that, though I don't think you have to have 2 degrees to know that killing your entire family is wrong.
I would hope not. The court said, quote, in an educated and civilized society, a daughter plays a multifaceted and indispensable role in the family, especially towards her parents. She is a caregiver and a supporter, a gentle hand and responsible voice, an embodiment of the cherished values of our society, and in whom a parent places blind faith and trust. End quote.
It sounds to me, and my westernized way of thinking, that a daughter is an unpaid servant, but what do I know?
Yeah, it sounds a lot like she is an extension of others, not a person in her own right. But it's not as if many people in the West don't expect their kids to do exactly what they want.
That's a good point.
The court then said Shabnam was, quote, influenced by love and lust of her paramour to have committed this brutal parricide. Not only did she forget her love for and duty towards her family, but also perpetrated the multiple homicide in her own house so as to fulfill her desire to be with the co-accused. End quote.
Again, I'm not at all absolving what Shabnam did, but if it isn't clear, family is the most important thing in Indian society. It is the central pillar of your life. The family is more important than any individual family member. What you do reflects on the family. You can't fall in love with someone that the family doesn't approve of. Again, family is above everything else.
And it sounds like the fact that Shabnam put herself above her family was almost as heinous as the homicides themselves.
It does. If all of Shabnam's appeals fail, she will be the first woman set to die since India gained independence in 1947. Shabnam's legal team is trying to halt it and is arguing that she is a victim too. Lawyer Shreya Rastogi says her client, who has never admitted to the crime, is a casualty of a patriarchal society that puts caste above all else. I think she is a product of the patriarchal society she was born into, but I wouldn't agree that she's a victim.
Definitely, even if she was in a difficult situation, and I'm not arguing that she wasn't, I still have a hard time believing murder was the only option to extricate herself from it. She knowingly made the choice to kill her family, and there's no getting around that.
Too true. Usman Saifi, a journalist, and his wife are caring for Shabnam's son as his foster parents. Islam forbids adoption, so they can't legally adopt him. Usman and Shabnam attended the same college and would ride the bus together. Usman said that Shabnam was kind to him and had come to his defense more than once when others had bullied him. After Usman confided in Shabnam that he did not have enough money to pay the school fees, Shabnam gave Usman the money. Usman feels he owes a lot to her and has a hard time reconciling the person he knew to the horrendous crime she was involved in. Usman feels that caring for her son is a way of paying her back.
I didn't know that Islam forbids adoption, but kudos to Usman and his wife for being decent human beings. It's not the son's fault in any way, but I don't think most people would want to look after the child of a murderer.
I agree. I feel like it is the one tiny bright spot in this story. Shabnam and Sareem's son is innocent, and I'm glad he has good people looking out for and taking care of him.
Me too. Shabnam's teenage son, we don't see the necessity of saying his name because he is a minor and there is a lot of interest in him and his mother. He, with the help of his foster parents, has petitioned the court to spare his mother from state sanctioned death. In 2021, her son, then 13, appealed to then President Ram Nath Kovind to commute her death sentence. To the waiting media, he stated, quote, "I love my mother. I am making an appeal to the president that her death sentence be commuted," end quote. Heartbreakingly, he held up a sign with the word forgiveness written on it. I can't even imagine trying to save your parent's life when that parent is the reason you have no other relatives besides for the father who's also in jail. I think that speaks to his character though, and I hope he'll be okay. Women can only be hanged at a specific jail in India. That jail, the Mathura district jail, hasn't hung a condemned inmate in many years. So, morbidly, the jail and gallows, which were built over 150 years ago, require some updating and stabilization to be able to complete the execution. As of 2021, the jail had begun preparing for the upcoming execution, but we found no further information that it has been scheduled or completed.
We have scoured many sources, and the last information we could find regarding this case was from 2021. I see no indication that the executions have actually taken place and can only assume that both Shabnam and Sareem are still on death row.
Next week, we'll be continuing our series on Daughters Who Kill when we discuss the case of Kim Edwards. All the sources we used for this episode are in the show notes below. If you'd like to suggest a case or theme for us to discuss, feel free to email us at terrifyinglytypicalpodcast@gmail.com. You can also follow us at terrifyinglytypicalpodcast on Instagram and at terrifyinglytypicalpod on TikTok. Leave us a comment below to let us know what you thought of the case. We'd love to hear your opinions.
See you next week.